The Trumpet Daily program begins right now.
Today's world news, what it means, where it's taking us.
I bring you the one and only possible message of world peace.
This is a message of hope, tremendous hope. And he said unto me, you must prophesy again.
The Trumpet Daily program begins right now.
Well, I think it's a little bit premature to talk about the death of NATO. It certainly seems to be weakened. I would say maybe even suffering from an autoimmune disease, because the link that seems to be weakening NATO is coming from within, is coming from its strongest ally, from the most powerful military country which is in this alliance, which is the United States. The speech by Vice President J.D. Vance in Munich was a very stark departure from the kind of speeches one makes at Munich, which is a security forum, which is to talk about geopolitical issues. And J.D. Vance made a scathing attack on Europe, on European policies, on internal politics of a European country. This is also a departure from an unwritten rule in U.S. diplomacy, which is internal politics stay at home. The U.S. does not bring its internal political problems to the outside world and does not criticize the internal political problems or not of its allies. So this is the real departure in many ways. And there was not one single mention of the real threat facing Europe and the Euro-Atlantic alliance today, which is Russia. So it was a stark departure. These were not the words of an ally at Munich. They were more the words of somebody who is positioning themselves on the outside, looking in.
Seen some of these headlines coming out from leaders from Poland, basically saying that they understand that the situation is very different now. Europe absolutely must step up to the table in terms of expenditures. It's really interesting to see this push and shove, apparently bringing European leaders together and understanding that they have to make a stronger defense commitment in their budgets. I think that's a huge development.
And by the way, this was the message President Trump consistently signaled between 2017 and 2020. And we have stepped up. Right now, we are spending 700 billion more on the European side of NATO than before President Trump came into office. It is absolutely still not enough. We have to do much, much more. But the good thing is now that we have a process in place by which we can exactly determine what the gaps are in terms of long-range missiles, in terms of our armies, in terms of our logistics, in terms of our military mobility, in terms of our air defense. And it will require a lot more money than we spent so far. We will come to the conclusions towards summer on this, but I can hear now from our European colleagues that they're willing to step up.
Well, it's fascinating that this discussion about Europe taking the reins appears to be galvanizing the countries of NATO to defend Europe, which is clearly what President Trump has pushed for and Secretary of Defense Hegseth is pushing for.
Last week, there was disbelief among EU leaders and diplomats. This week, there is a dawning realization rippling across the continent that the world they find themselves in now is very different to the world of just 7 days ago. And the moment we're told that has crystallized this for them was the Munich Security Conference at the end of last week. Not the big set-piece speeches by the likes of J.D. Vance, the US Vice President, but the countless smaller conversations that politicians, diplomats were having on the corridors and side rooms with members of Donald Trump's team. What they heard, they told us, was a unified message, that this wasn't just hyperbole, that Donald Trump's vision of the world is very different to anything they've heard from the US president since the formation of NATO in 1949.
The earth-shaking events continue. I think I said last week that we've got to prepare ourselves. We've got to brace ourselves for an acceleration of prophetic events to happen in the heart of Europe, and they're certainly happening. You're listening to Stephen Flurry, and this is the Trumpet Daily. We appreciate you joining us on today's show. You can get to the live video stream of this program at the Rumble channel, rumble.com/Trumpet Daily. I think it's a similar address over at YouTube. And then, of course, our own website, trumpetdaily.com, will take you to the live stream as well. All the shows posted after the fact as a podcast that you can view on demand if you would like to watch it later. So A lot to get to on today's show, and a lot of our own material, just things that we've been writing about, talking about for decades. I mean, this really and truly is the signature prophecy of Herbert W. Armstrong, the seventh and final resurrection of the Holy Roman Empire. The European nations, as you heard there in that cold open, they're galvanized. And this is something the Trump administration is pushing for. They're excited about it. They see this as a victory, clearing the way for Germany, a resurgent Germany. We've talked a lot about an American resurgence. Well, there's another one that's going to be going on right before our eyes. It's going to be happening in the heart of Europe. It's happening already. That first lady there, that commentator in the cold open, she said about Hegseth last week and J.D. Vance, how that these were not the words of an ally. I mean, that's saying the quiet part out loud. They're going to see the United States as an enemy. Some of them already do. Some of them already see America that way. What a gross miscalculation this is going to turn out to be. What was it Mr. Armstrong said? A calculated risk. Play clip 11. This is from the National Security Advisor, Mike Waltz. They're negotiating with Russia, even as we speak, in Saudi Arabia. This is clip 11.
If you just think about, just in a few months, President Trump has shifted the entire global conversation from not if the war is going to end, but just how it's going to end. And only President Trump can do that. And in the Oval Office less than a week ago, both President Putin and President Zelensky both said to him, only you, President Trump, could drive this war to a conclusion.
And so we're speaking of a calculated risk to place this kind of trust in Vladimir Putin, and we think that's going to work out well. Of course, Europe, they're fuming. They feel like they're kind of shut out of these negotiations, and so does Ukraine, for that matter. And so here come all the U.S. envoys. You've got Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Mike Waltz, as I said. And they're lauding this as a tremendous achievement. Only President Trump could pull this off. This is from the Associated Press. Senior officials from Russia and the U.S. met in Saudi Arabia on Tuesday to begin talks on improving ties and negotiating an end to the war in Ukraine. So President Trump has made no secret of his desire to end the hostilities, to end the war, but improving ties as well with Russia. It says delegations led by U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov met at the Diriyah Palace in Riyadh. The meeting marks another pivotal step by the Trump administration to reverse U.S. policy on isolating Russia, and is meant to pave the way for a meeting between U.S. President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin. So this is just stage one. The next one will see Trump and Putin together. Anything to end the war, anything to bring on a ceasefire. And we saw that strategy in play with the Middle East, with Gaza. And you get to yet another deadline. This Sam talked about this yesterday on the show. Yet another deadline, and of course the hostages, not all of them released. I mean, we really are witnessing an epic masterclass at the moment on human nature and man's tendency to trust in man, no matter how evil, no matter how carnal, no matter how far removed from God the individual might be, no matter how many people have been murdered at the hands of some of these world leaders. Trust them. This just shows how little trust we have in God. And yet we have so much trust in man, in some cases in madmen. Jeremiah 17:9 says that the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. It's amazing how much that theme, it just plays out again and again in the Gospels during the ministry of Jesus Christ, as he kept exposing to the people that eventually crucified him, that murdered him. He kept exposing their evil hearts. He kept showing them who and what they are apart from God. They would come to him, Jesus I mean, and say, well, I can't believe you're sitting down with your disciples to eat when they haven't even washed their hands. And Jesus said, look, how about if you wash your hearts? Look at the evil that comes out from the human heart. And you're talking to me about washing hands physically? Not that that's wrong, but as you know from the Pharisees, they just had things completely out of whack. They focused in on tedious little details, a legalistic approach to law keeping or keeping rules that were their own human traditions, Jesus said. Because of your human traditions, you make the law of God of no effect. You have voided the law of God. You've nullified it because of your own carnal traditions. Is that what we're seeing play out today? Trust in man. This is from one of my father's articles, October 2023, in the Trumpet magazine. If you don't have a copy or a subscription, make sure you call our operators today. The 800 number, 866-930-3024. But the article title, this is from a couple years ago at the Trumpet, World Leaders Who No Longer Have a Human Mind. I mean, God, in the Bible, God calls so many of these world leaders beasts. He's talking about a beast power emerging out of the heart of Europe. And here come the Israelite leaders, happy to make peace with these kinds of leaders. It says Daniel made intriguing and astonishing statements about these mighty leaders who would rise to rule the world. We need to think about these statements deeply. God tells us that these mighty military political leaders have the minds of wild beasts. And you see how that it's been playing out in Ukraine as people have just been slaughtered. There's no doubt about that. It says, in other words, they no longer have a human mind. And it goes through some of the history with Nebuchadnezzar and the fact that he was dwelling in the field for years like a wild beast. And God brought that on to make a point. This is what we're dealing with. It says here, the leaders of these great powers no longer have the minds of human beings. They had the hearts of wild, raving beasts. That's why these empires are called beasts. They were ruled by men who took on the mind of a beast. There's a crucial spiritual dimension to such a transformation. These men who became so brutal simply gave themselves over to an evil spirit. It says such beastly thinking is inspired by Satan the devil. My father, in another article, this was from several years ago, where he said that the Ukraine war will not start World War III. But within that article, I mean, that in itself is a pretty bold prophecy. But within that article, he talks about Vladimir Putin and just how much Israelite leaders want to cozy up to making a deal with the devil. Isaiah 33 and verse 7 says, behold, their valiant ones shall cry without, and the ambassadors of peace shall weep bitterly. We've got to take the long view here. We've got to look at the end result. This really and truly is an Achilles heel for the Trump administration. to think that you can make a deal with anyone in this world, that you can make, and again, I'm not suggesting that the way Joe Obama handled the Ukraine war, that there's no corruption on the other side. I mean, it's a mess. In fact, Obama's people, they were trying to make some kind of a deal even before the fake president left office. Men have tried everything. That's the point, though, is it doesn't work. It keeps blowing up in our faces. And then you look at what your Bible says, Jeremiah 6 and verse 14. It says, when they come and say, peace, peace, just know that there's no peace. When the envoys and the diplomats, the peacemakers, are proclaiming peace, when they're waving the sheet of paper, the agreement, just know that there's no peace coming. And the reason for that is because we don't know the way to peace. Just like Isaiah 59 and verse 8 says. Just like it says in Romans 3 and verse 17. We don't know the way. There is a way to peace, but man doesn't know. And we've demonstrated that over the course of 6,000 years of human history. Mr. Armstrong said that man has proven unable to control and resist the downward pull of his passions and nature. And so this is why Herbert Armstrong was there at the establishment of the United Nations back in the 1940s. And he said, the seeds of the next war are being planted here. All you see is fighting and bickering. And now we see NATO, this post-World War II alliance, intended to protect Europe from Russia, yes, to keep the U.S. in, to keep Russia out, and to keep Germany down, as I said last week. And now look, America's on the way out. Who knows what happens with Russia and its dealings with, and look at how much even Trump exposed his first term. As he went over there, he was then talking about paying your fair share, at least get it up to 2%. And then he was also calling out Germany, saying, look, you've got this gas deal with Russia, and we're trying to protect you from Russia. Why are you empowering Russia then? Well, now we're several years beyond that. Now it's up to 5%. And you've got Poland and other countries saying, we've got to hurry. We've got to put more money into our military. We need a united military. I mean, listen to, I think Sam played this yesterday on the show, but this was Zelensky in a speech that he gave at the Munich conference. I think this was from Saturday, clip 5.
Let's be honest, now we can't rule out the possibility that America might say no to Europe on issues that threaten it. Many leaders have talked about Europe that needs its own military, an army of Europe. And I really believe that time has come. The armed forces of Europe must be created.
The armed forces, it's chilling if you think of it. Think about someone saying that, let's say back in the 1950s. I think what Europe needs is a united army. We need the armed forces of Europe. Be careful what you wish for. Because a lot of people are wishing for this now. A lot of people are applauding this. How does this happen? I mean, what a dramatic change. This should be making headlines all over the world. The coming European army. The armed forces of Europe. Vladimir Zelensky, it says, has responded to the American government's latest remarks with a remarkably pointed message. This is from news.com.au, Australia. And he referred quite directly to J.D. Vance's remarks at the conference as well. It says, just yesterday here in Munich, The U.S. Vice President made it clear. The old relationship between Europe and America is ending, and Europe needs to adjust to that. He sees it. European leaders see it. Vladimir Putin sees it. The old relationship between Europe and America is over. It's over. And you read some of these other comments, about what's going on behind closed doors. Let me see if I can skip ahead to one of these. Play clip 10.
We have warned since a long time that could happen. As soon as we knew that Mr. Trump was elected in November, and even well before. So there is no real surprise, but the matter of the truth is that everybody now is seeing the two pillars of our NATO alliance shaking together. I mean, the political one, and the Mr. Vance's speech was really a dire attack on the political nature of NATO, which is based on the consensus on value, on democratic values, and on common interest. And on the other side, obviously, the threat of the US reducing their efforts, not only in NATO, but for Ukraine, is obviously very worrying, because us as Europeans, we have not been able to face the issue before. That's okay. That's not okay, but this is a fact. Now we have to work in a rush in a certain way, which is not good, but nevertheless, we have to make some damage control on the short term, prepare the middle and the long term.
That's a former NATO general who's there on TV. This is in France, talking about the death of NATO. Here again, you go back to some of the Trumpet articles we've had over the years. I mean, we were right on top of this development. Telling you that Britain would be on the outside, looking in, as far as the European Union is concerned. Telling you that America would eventually would withdraw from NATO, and that Germany would take the lead. All of this is happening, and it's happening fast. This is from Ambrose Evans Pritchard regarding the U.S. and Ukraine. Revealed Trump's confidential plan to put Ukraine in a stranglehold. Panic in Kyiv as U.S. president demands higher share of GDP than Germany's First World War reparations. Donald Trump's demand for $500 billion payback from Ukraine goes far beyond U.S. control over the country's critical minerals. It covers everything from ports and infrastructure to oil and gas and the larger resource base of the country. Now we'll see if there's much success regarding any kind of payback, but you can't imagine the Ukrainian leader, Zelensky and his assistants, to put it nicely. You can't imagine that they're very excited about this. If this is what Donald Trump is aiming for behind closed doors. It says if this draft were accepted, Trump's demands would amount to a higher share of Ukrainian GDP than reparations imposed on Germany at the Versailles Treaty. That's in the Telegraph, and there's another Telegraph piece. Here's why Trump wants to make Ukraine a U.S. economic colony. I mean, he's making big, bold moves, Donald Trump. You look at what's happening on this continent, with claims on Greenland or the Panama Canal. He's going to do some pretty bold and dramatic action in Europe. And we're only 4 weeks in. And European leaders are waking up to the fact that Karl-Theodor zu Guttenberg, he was on MSNBC. I'll play the clips for you later. He was on MSNBC Friday reacting to J.D. Vance and what the Americans are doing and saying, even behind closed doors in Europe. At Munich, zu Guttenberg's talking about how, even America would suffer if there was a trade war. Yeah, you throw that wrinkle to the story, all the tariffs, And then what Trump and his people are expecting from Ukraine in return for all of the assistance that Americans have given, over $200 billion over the last few years. These are earth-shaking developments. Listen to Newt Gingrich on Fox Business, clip 15.
And I think J.D. Vance's speech, plus his speech in Paris earlier, those two speeches are the most important wake-up call to Europe, maybe in my lifetime. Because he's just telling them the truth. If you don't change, if you don't modernize, if you don't become competitive, you're gone. You will cease to exist as a civilization. And that's a fact.
You've got to modernize. You've got to be a superpower. You've got to catch up. I mean, just consider this message. Contrast it with the message to Germany after World War II. Never again will you be allowed to militarize your nation. Never. It's never going to happen. And we've got the NATO alliance in place to ensure that it doesn't. It's never going to happen. And now here's where we are. It's happening. It's happening. And it has virtually everyone's approval, including the United States. Fast-paced events, for sure. Listen to this from Britain, clip 16.
Some moments can shape an entire premiership. Some can shape an entire century. European leaders descended hastily on the Elysee Palace in Paris today to wrestle with the magnitude of the problem handed to them, not just by the president of Russia, but by their ally, the president of the United States. Sowing the seeds ahead of this summit, Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk set the tone for expectation. Vast uplifts in defence spending across an entire continent.
It has to happen now in a very massive way. I'm talking about decisions, about financing, logistics, political decisions when it comes to the defensive capabilities of the European Union and the European countries.
And of course, the powerhouse economically is Germany. The economic powerhouse on the continent of Europe is Germany. And so all of these leaders, there's the leader of Poland, following in Germany's steps. Germany doesn't even have the strongman yet. It's like my father has said so many times, the empire's there. It's just waiting for the emperor. When they get their version, you could say, of Donald Trump, you know, a strongman willing to make bold decisions, knowing that the world approves, knowing that America approves. The signature prophecy of Herbert Armstrong. He was talking about this right after World War II ended. He spoke about it for decades. He talked about European unity. And look at what we've seen. I mean, just even going back to the fall of the Berlin Wall, what was happening in the late 80s, early 90s, the collapse of the Soviet Union, Eastern Europe coming together with Western Europe. And now you've had the struggle over the last couple decades to bring it all together, economically, to bring it together as far as a government is concerned, and now a united military. It's got everything it needs. Everything an empire needs. Listen to this from the same, actually this is the report out of France, clip 8.
Panic stations in Paris, an emergency brainstorming session of European leaders taking place in the French capital, not Brussels, where NATO's strongest power no longer seems a reliable ally to some. Can leaders figure out on the fly a way to shore up Ukraine and rewrite the playbook on European defense? This as the Trump administration makes good on what it said it would do, sit down with Putin's Russia and shut allies out of negotiations. During the Cold War, deterrence included nuclear weapons. France and the UK have them, enough, though, to make Moscow think twice. Today in the France 24 debate, are we witnessing the death of NATO?
The death of NATO. And then shutting out the allies. They don't like that either. And so they're going to move quickly. They've got to, the way they see it. We've got to go it alone. NATO's dying. America's abandoning us. America's not even negotiating with our interests in mind. It's just a ceasefire. That's what we want. And you can be sure Putin's going to get something pretty good out of this arrangement. Ukraine, we'll see what happens to Ukraine. But doing a deal with Putin, this is where we are. One more from the France coverage, clip 9.
And what's so extraordinary is that on the one hand, the United States is saying to Europe, your security is no longer our priority. And at the same time, it starts meddling inside the internal politics of European countries. That is what's so extraordinary.
But one thing is clear, whatever we do, Europe must do more. And that is what American presidents, starting from Barack Obama, have said always, that Europe must take more responsibility and start to pay for its security. I heard, surprisingly, that this weekend has been a wake-up call. It was surprised because, in my opinion, the wake-up call was 2008 as Russia attacked Georgia, 2014 Ukraine. But we were not waking up, and that is the problem.
Yeah, he's right. A little larger context there. Russia's been on the march since 2008. And Europe, we've, as far as the Trumpet goes, I mean, we were talking about how Russian aggression is going to accelerate the formation of this final resurrection of the Holy Roman Empire as well. And now you've got NATO collapsing. So European leaders with one voice are saying we have to act, and we have to act fast. We've kept our eye on Karl-Theodor zu Guttenberg. A few people sent me the video from MSNBC on Friday as he's responding largely to J.D. Vance's message at the Munich Security Conference, and then also Pete Hegseth. I mean, the conference continued through the weekend, where you had Zelensky saying what he said about the armed forces of Europe. And now you've got the negotiations in Saudi Arabia happening today. This is Sue Guttenberg just talking about the mixed messaging, the way he and MSNBC in Europe sees it regarding the Trump administration. Clip 1.
We are all puzzled, Anna. It's a messaging that changes almost on an hourly basis. Over the last few days, we were all quite surprised by the call that the president had with Vladimir Putin, and then especially by the fact that his newly appointed Secretary of Defense is obviously taking negotiation tokens off the table. So, and all of these things without having the European allies and partners somehow included. So there is confusion is probably the mildest word I can find for that.
You're empowering Russia, says Guttenberg, and you're freezing us out. You're not giving us a voice. They've been relying on American protection for so long, and now they see the way they see it again. It's gone. It's collapsing. It's over. So they're going to move at an accelerated pace to finish out or to complete this prophesied union. Again, Daniel 2 tells us it's a mixture of iron and clay. So it's not easy bringing these 10 kings together with all of their unique interests at play. But they do. Revelation 17 says they come together in a show of unity for just a brief span of time. There's real strength. There's iron-like strength. This is what your Bible prophesies. Listen again to zu Guttenberg as he's talking about NATO and the road ahead. Clip 2.
I certainly do. We are definitely not prepared to balance the current or the existing American security umbrella for Europe. It would take years to come to a level where we could feel as secure as we need to be. And on the other hand, of course, Trump has a point, and as had already Joe Biden and others before that the Europeans need to ramp up their security measures, and we need to do more without a question. However, in that situation, decision right now to question core elements of NATO, of the alliance, and of our shared security is reckless. And therefore, I sat in a room before when the vice president held his speech, and I just looked into rather confused faces. And he didn't talk about Ukraine at all, as you've said before. It was more or less lecturing Europe about democracy. Quite astonishing coming out of his mouth.
Didn't appreciate the lecture coming from J.D. Vance. Keep in mind, the Daniel 8 man, he comes in, Daniel 11 brings this out too. He comes in with flatteries. He says all the right things. He's a smooth talker, whoever it is. He says all the things they want to hear in Europe. And then a mind change happens. And suddenly you're dealing with a beast-like mind, beast-like thinking, as my father brought out in that article from October of 2023. These are some chilling prophecies. God's trying to get through to man and to help him see that we don't know the way to peace. We can't bring peace to this world. Look at Jerusalem as an example. The very name, the city, it means the city of peace. And that area has been more war-torn wars than any other region on earth. Just constant conflict, struggle. I mean, peace is coming to Jerusalem when Jesus Christ returns to this earth, when he sets foot on the Mount of Olives, right there in eastern Jerusalem, and establishes the kingdom of God on earth. And then finally, all of mankind will be taught the way to peace. MSNBC played a clip of Donald Trump saying that Russia invaded Ukraine, in his view, because Joe Biden talked about Ukraine joining NATO. And I think there was more to it than that. It's a little bit of an oversimplification. But it's something for Guttenberg to pick up on and to criticize the bad orange man, to criticize Orange Hitler. This is clip 3.
And it is beyond any historical knowledge. It's nonsense. And we all know that the war started out of very, very different reasons. And the problem we are facing right now with that phone call Trump had with Vladimir Putin is that in our perception, it legitimizes aggression. And just consider what that means for the next years to come. So that is what should be discussed right now at the Munich Security Conference. Instead, we hear a pro-seminar about democracy.
Isn't that rich? For Donald Trump to have any dialogue with Putin. And again, we're not saying that that's the way to go. God wants us to look to him. That's the point that we've been making the last couple of weeks. But all these double dealings, these behind closed door dealings with Russia, including leading up to World War II, that Germany has engaged in, the bad deals that Germany has made. But see, now they're very critical of America. It's easy to take a shot at America. It's easy. You see it more and more. You see it coming, as Sam went into yesterday, you see it coming from even brother nations. The anti-American hostility, and so much of this, the patriotism. As I said after the hockey match on Saturday, I mean, it sure is a different America, and it's happened so quickly. We're only 4.5 years removed from taking a knee during the national anthem. Our own people taking a knee. Americans taking a knee. And now the national anthem gets disrespected, and there's an all-out brawl. And then you have the Canadian spirit, the Canadian patriotism. And Jeroboam fueling so much of it for both countries. And there's a spirit that's emerging out of the heart of Europe as well. We've got to put Europe first. We've got to make Europe great again. Mega, mega, mega. And Germany's happy to take the lead. Where is this leading? listen to one final bit from Zu Guttenberg. This is clip 4.
How will we see Europe shift their approach to this new Trump administration?
Well, we have to accept the fact that he is president, and we need to deal with a deal maker. However, I think we are in a new world right now in that regard. Europe is prepared. Europe has potential counter tariffs, but just imagine a world where we would slide into a trade war of that dimension. So this is nothing anyone would like to have, and the repercussions for the US might also be severe. So I think that's something the president has not taken into account so far. But if we are forced as Europeans to react, we will react, but that's not the world I'd like to live in.
What did he say there? The repercussions for the U.S. might also be severe. So there you go. As they band together, think of Isaiah 23, the Mart of Nations. As they enter into a secret deal with the Asian powers and freeze out the United States and Britain, it could be severe. The consequences could be severe for the U.S. We know this is coming, but he says there, look, we've got to accept the fact that we're dealing with a deal maker now. He makes deals. He prides himself in that, for sure. It says the United States, this is from, I think, the New York Times, and Belarus are negotiating a broader deal. Sorry, this is at Geopolitical Futures. A broader deal following a prisoner swap last week. According to the story, 3 U.S. officials, including the Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Europe, met in Minsk with Belarusian President Lukashenko. It says the two countries could be in talks on a deal that would involve Belarus releasing more political prisoners in exchange for Washington lifting sanctions on Belarusian banks and potash exports over at Euro Intelligence. It says the U.S. will want to address the threat of Russian alliance building with Iran, North Korea, and China. Of course, we know about the kings of the East, the Prince of Rosh prophecy as well. I think I have this booklet. Maybe it's not up here at the moment, but we've got so much in the way of prophetic writings, teachings about Russia, about China, and the deals that it has with the kings of the East or the others in the kings of the East, Iran, the #1 state sponsor of terrorism. Can you begin to appreciate just how spectacular the backfire is going to be? Eventually, the Bible says, as I read to you, the ambassadors for peace are going to weep. They're going to sob. They're going to be crying in the end. How did this happen? How did this explode in our faces? It says here, the Ukraine war is lost. Western Ukraine will become a massive financial burden for the EU, for which the EU is not prepared. So if Russia gets some territory, if the U.S. gets its wish and gets to leave, and if they pressure Ukraine into some of those mineral rights or whatever, and then if Europe is not only left to foot the bill for its own military, but perhaps to foot the bill for helping Ukraine after the war, it's every nation for itself. It certainly is. That article, Should Donald Trump Trust Vladimir Putin? It's from March of 2017. My father gave a Key of David program around that time, which became this article, I believe. Richard Palmer played some of this on his Trumpet World episode on Friday. But here's a clip from my father's program, The Prophesied Prince of Russia, Part 2, clip 13.
Can Mr. Trump really get along well, very well, with Vladimir Putin when he has such disgusting and devastating policies that are just sick to the core and even satanic? Can we get along with him? Can God get along with the devil? We need to think about that, because this is the real world that we're talking about. Vladimir Putin has killed in far excess of 160,000 of his own people in Chechnya. Now, that would be somewhat like Washington, D.C. deciding they're going to kill 160,000 people in New York, for example, the state of New York. And Putin's conduct inside Russia, well, you also have to look at the more than 130 journalists that he has murdered since he has been president. And he has just taken total control over the media. He just crushed any independent media. That would be like America murdering all the opposing journalists of the administration and then just crushing anybody who in the media who opposes them. Now, this is something that is very serious, and we all need to think about it.
You can see there the date. That's right at the start of Donald Trump's first term. And he came in bragging basically about how he gets along well with Vladimir Putin. I mean, I think he really sees Putin as someone that can be dealt with across the negotiating table. My father draws attention to that in this same program, clip 14.
But U.S. presidential candidate Donald Trump said on July 31st, 2015, I think I would just get along very well with Vladimir Putin. Now let me show you what is going to happen to people who get close to that kind of a person and get close to, let's say, getting along with them very well. What happens when we get closer and closer to Putin? We get further and further away from God. That's what these verses are saying. That's deadly dangerous. Where is God? We get further and further away from God and closer to Vladimir Putin so he can prey upon us. And that's what he will do. That's all he knows to do. And he'll do it.
Just to repeat some of that, it came in the form of an article a little bit later. Again, my father says, the closer our president and our nation gets to Putin, the further it gets from what is good and what is right. The further it gets from God. He talked about how deadly dangerous this is. Again, look at Romans 3. Look at Isaiah 59. Look at what man has done in the name of peace. Look at man's path to peace. Has it produced a real, lasting, genuine peace? Look at Putin's track record just over the past 15, 20 years. That article, by the way, that's should Donald Trump trust Vladimir Putin? It's a good question. There's another article more recently, the Ukraine war will not start World War III. And there's a section in this article under the subhead, Trump's error. Again, he has weaknesses. He has a lot of strengths, and we've noted so many of them on this program. I mean, looking at what he's doing with Doge and all the billions and billions of waste and fraud that they're exposing, 70-some billion just from an audit on the IRS, Social Security. Overpayments, payments going to dead people. 70 billion in the last 8 years. And Elon Musk hasn't even gotten to that department yet, or he's just getting there, I guess. Look at what America's been doing to itself. No wonder Donald Trump can send his envoys abroad and speak with such boldness. The gravy train is ending. We want reparations. We want payback. And you're going to have to go it alone. And we're going to talk to Putin ourselves. We're going to squeeze you out. And he gets a lot of support here at home. He sure does. But we've got to consider the end. We've got to look through the lens of Bible prophecy. We've got to see where all of this is leading. The subhead, Trump's error. Donald Trump recently boasted that during his presidency, Russia didn't attack. Don't forget, under Bush, they took over Georgia. Under Obama, they took over Crimea. And under Biden, they're taking over everything, he told Sean Hannity. And under Trump, you know what they took over? They took over nothing. So this is a bragging point for him. It says here, President Trump did have a bolder foreign policy in some areas, but he was also woefully wrong in other areas, as we will see. Anyone who thinks that Trump can single-handedly restore America's standing in the world and heal the national will and pride in our power that God himself has broken because of our sins is terribly mistaken. You see, we've got to see God, as we've been saying over and again. Even in the lead up to Jeroboam's return, we've got to see God's hand. We need to look to God for the peace solution. We're not doing that. And furthermore, we're certainly not looking at our sins. We're not considering our ways. God's trying to get our attention. He says here, this is again my father's article from May, June 2023, so almost 2 years ago. It says, Mr. Trump believes he could negotiate with Vladimir Putin, giving him sections of Ukraine and expecting this to pacify him. That reveals a total lack of comprehension about who he is dealing with. You can't appease someone like this. It says, President Trump said that Putin is a man that he got along really well with. Is that true? Is that wise? Should anyone get along with an evil man like the Prince of Russia? Can God get along with the devil? Does God negotiate with the devil? What Donald Trump doesn't realize is that Bible prophecy shows that it is not Russia America needs to be concerned about, or even China. The power we most need to watch out for in end-time events is Europe. You guessed it. You know the answer if you know prophecy. That's the power that we should fear the most. And yet those 10 kings at present are being empowered by this U.S. administration. They're being encouraged to militarize. And Germany's being encouraged to lead the way. Pretty amazing. Prophecy shows that America's efforts will backfire spectacularly. The superpower that is prophesied to destroy and dethrone America and take its place in dominating the world is a German-led European alliance. And this really brings us to the uniqueness of the message that you get from this church, from this work, from the Trumpet.com, from all of our literature, from the U.S. and Britain in prophecy. You don't hear this anywhere. You don't get commentary about this anywhere. You certainly aren't warned the way that God is warning our people, our nations, the way that God is warning this world through this church. It's a very unique message. Here is Donald Trump not only pushing for peace with Putin, but he's abandoning Europe. And you've got these European leaders just scrambling and pleading with one another to act fast, to act with pace, with speed, to accelerate the development of this united European army. Well, I've got some other news items that would fit right along with this theme, but we're out of time. The fastest moving hour in broadcasting. You're listening to Stephen Flurry, and this is the Trumpet Daily. Thank you for joining us on this chilly day, and we'll see you again tomorrow.